I'm Lori Dawson, for those of you who don't know me, and I want to welcome everyone. My co-chair, Sherry Gray of the Meetups, is not with us tonight, but I'm going to just introduce her even though she's not here. On behalf of the Meetup committee and the board, we're really happy to see everybody here. We had hoped that we would be meeting in person by now. It is a little disappointing, but we're happy that we have this medium that we can use. And so for now, at least, we'll be meeting on Zoom for our meetups, and we'll see if we're going to be having any in-person events. I'm sure we'll figure out something along the way. Please check our website, as always, for events. Chris Alexander does a great job keeping us up to speed so we know what's going on. And I won't go into specific announcements about events because everybody can look at that. And I'm sure there'll be some folks on this call that will be announcing different things throughout the evening. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Let's all keep our mics muted if we're not talking, so we don't hear any random cats or birds or whatever. And everybody, just a reminder about the stop video function. If you need to move around, it can be helpful to stop the video so we don't see that. And everybody knows about the participant box, and we can do our reactions if we want to raise our hands in reactions, or also in participants, right? We got that ability also. And later we'll see if we're going to be doing, you can all, with this amount of people, we can do real time raising of hands, really, because we're all on one screen together. So we don't have to use the virtual screen. All right, so I'm going to turn it over now to Nancy Martinez, who's going to get us started, as she's our chair of our membership committee. Take it away.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Okay, thanks, Lori. Yes, I'd like to add a welcome on behalf of the membership committee, all 5 of us. If anyone would like to volunteer to help, you're welcome to. We have Janice Burns, Allison Miller, who at the last minute couldn't come. Childcare issues, she's a young mom, Mary Estelle Reichman, and Susan Van Ralt. So we do this September annual meeting, and we'd give you ice cream if we were together. Don't forget that. We always used to have ice cream as a welcome and a member orientation, and it's really for new members as well as long-standing members. We all need a refresher and a re-energized opportunity. And I think what better way to get updated, informed, energized, and ready for the upcoming elections and legislative session than to hear from our colleagues at the New York State League. And Jennifer Wilson is with us. As Barb Thomas said, this has been a busy year for the League and for Jennifer. She's the deputy director at the New York State League, where she is an expert on lobbying and policy issues. And she'll speak and walk us through a PowerPoint, I think, Jennifer, and then we'll have time for questions and then discussion of other issues. So welcome, Jennifer.
I hit the share screen for the mute. Great, thanks everybody. Hey everyone, happy to see everybody virtually. Bummed I can't have ice cream, that's okay. Maybe next year. So I put together a little slide deck for this, and if you've been on any of my other remote virtual presentations that we've done over the last couple of months, some of this information may be repetitive to you. You also may notice this one is a little bit more bare bones, so I apologize about that. But I took a little piece of every presentation we've done recently to kind of put this together, but basically, we've been doing a lot. We've done a lot over the pandemic, particularly this summer, between the 5 ballot propositions that are going to be on the ballot, were approved to be on the ballot for November, the Redistricting Commission really starting to gear up and get its work done, We've also, the legislature has been fairly active as well. As I'm sure most of you know, we had turnover in our executive branch, which was a pretty big deal. And I think a lot of legislators, now that there is more options for remote meetings, are a little bit more interested in doing some work outside of the regularly scheduled session. Plus, it's not a state Senate, state assembly election year, so they have a little bit more free time to do legislative planning than they would in a campaign year. So why don't we just start with sort of the big recent announcement, which is we are going to be having a ballot proposition campaign. We had an event last night kind of talking through our position on each of the propositions. Here are the 5 if you haven't seen them yet. The first is with regards to amending the reapportionment or apportionment and redistricting process. The second is about adding the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment into the state constitution. The third is about eliminating the 10-day advance voter registration requirement. The fourth is about authorizing no excuse absentee ballot voting. And the fifth is about increasing the jurisdiction of the New York City Civil Court. Thus far, we have only done educational work on this. So on the screen is a picture of the voter guide part 2, where we have the description of each of these proposals written out, each of the actual ballot questions as they'll appear on the ballot, as well as pros and cons for each of them that are totally nonpartisan. But now that we're getting a little closer to the election, we are going to be taking positions on 4 of the 5. So we are opposing the First Amendment, we are supporting the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and we are taking no position on the 5th, because even though this proposition is in amendment to the state constitution, it only applies to New York City Civil Court, so we decided we couldn't take position on that since it didn't apply to the whole state. If you want more information on that, you can rewatch the campaign kickoff that we had yesterday, which I just posted on the Facebook today, along with some of the graphics that we are putting out. And speaking of graphics, we have a lot of material that we created for local leagues that we sent to voter service chairs and to presidents today. Here's an example of a graphic. We also had sample press releases, talking points for talking about this in the league's position, and the background for each proposal. Especially the first one is pretty complicated. I could talk about the first proposal for over an hour, but we don't have time for that tonight. So here's just a quick sample of that. And if you notice on this image, it's only proposition 1, 3, and 4, and that is because the second proposition related to adding clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment to the Constitution. We are partnering with the Vote Yes on Prop 2, Vote Yes for Clean Air and Water Coalition, which is run by environmental advocates. We're partnering with them so that we can use their materials, use their talking points. They have a huge, great campaign on this, and I'll put the link for that in the chat at the end. And the last thing on the ballot campaign is we did create palm cards for this campaign. So on the one side of the palm card, it says reject regressive redistricting, vote no on Prop 2. On the other side of the palm card, it says expand voting rights and has Prop 3 and 4. Those are going to be getting delivered to the office tomorrow, out in the mail to voter service chairs, hopefully tomorrow and the next day. So hopefully leagues will have them in time for National Voter Registration Day, but if not, you'll have them for other events. So that's the update on the ballot campaign. That's one of the things we've been working a lot on. The next thing we've been working a lot on is redistricting and the census, which I would say is probably the #1 thing I've been working on this summer, is getting folks ready to testify about redistricting, keeping tabs on the Redistricting Commission, and just basically making sure that the process is fair, which unfortunately it doesn't seem like it's been that fair thus far, but we'll get into it. So starting off as a little quick census recap, because I think this is important. I find this very interesting. I think most people know that unfortunately we are going to be losing a congressional seat, which is a huge disappointment, but actually very impressive because originally we were slated to lose 2 seats. So we are only losing 1. We only lost that by a small amount of people not filling out the census. It stinks, but this is the reality. And what's interesting is even though we're losing a congressional seat, our population actually grew in the last 10 years. It just grew slower than everybody else. So our population only grew about 4.2%, which is great, but the national average was about 7.4. So it didn't grow as quickly as other states, unfortunately. And looking at this on a map of the US, this is kind of showing the change from where we were to where we are. So this is the new, if anyone's on the phone, just a quick description of the image. This is a picture of all 50 states, and on each of the states is the new number of congressional seats that they will have. It's also colored to show who is losing and gaining seats. So the green states are the ones gaining seats. So if you'll notice, it's a lot of kind of more rural states like North Carolina, Colorado, Montana, Texas, Oregon, I guess you could say is maybe not the most rural, and Florida too is maybe not the most rural. Texas is actually gaining 2 seats, which is great for Texas. I don't know how that is for everybody else. And the states that are losing seats are pretty much all of the northeastern states, minus like the super far out north ones. So New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, and California is also going to be losing a seat. So I think it's very interesting that so many northeastern states have lost a seat. I don't know what that says about population movement, if people are moving because of the weather, as our former governor used to like to say, or if it's because of the taxes, which I think is probably a little bit more realistic than the weather. But whatever the case, we are losing seats. So now that we have the census data, the Redistricting Commission is actually able to draw maps and has drawn maps, which is great. They had 2 meetings in September. The first, they talked about how they had hired 2 mapping consulting firms, which we were pretty disappointed about because up until that meeting, this was at the beginning of September, there had been no notice that they were even looking to hire mapping consulting firms. They just basically did this on their own. There was no RFP, there was no public sort of process. They just hired these firms. Redistricting Insights and Redistricting Partners are the names of the 2 firms. And I'm sure most of you can guess that they're very partisan, both of the firms. One is a Democratic, one firm is basically hired by Democratic counties, cities, villages, municipalities to draw lines. And the same thing, the other one is the one that's often hired by Democratic leaning municipalities, cities, villages to draw lines. So it is what it is. The commission released their maps last Wednesday, and they also announced the hearing dates at that meeting as well. And they finally posted public testimonies to their website, nyirc.gov. It took so long, I feel like, to get these testimonies posted. We had even sent them a letter at the end of August, not super end of August, kind of like almost end of August, basically saying like, hey, where are the testimonies? People submitted testimonies and they testified, and there should be transcripts. The transcripts are still nowhere in sight. The multiple language options for any of these things are still nowhere in sight, but at least we have something posted. I'm sure most of you also heard that the draft maps, 2 versions came out of this process, which is not unheard of, but it is disheartening for sure, because it definitely shows that there was not communication about these maps. It shows that the testimonies that were submitted and presented by communities of interest probably were an afterthought and not necessarily the main driver of these maps. And unfortunately, there isn't really a clear way to know what the motivation was behind the maps, because when the commission released the maps, they gave no explanation. There was no executive summary saying, hey, this is why we did this, or this is why we made these decisions. There was no press output. You know, they didn't have the mapping consultants come forward and like deliver a press briefing saying, okay, we did these lines like this, we did these lines like this because of these reasons. There was nothing like that. So the reaction of the press and now of the public after reading the press's articles was basically, well, if you're not giving us your motivations and you're putting out 2 sets of maps, obviously these are partisan maps. Whether that's true or not, I have yet to determine. I've talked to some other experts who have said that each map has pros and cons. New York City seems to be one of the most difficult areas on both maps to sort of unravel. And it's made duly complicated because this is 3 levels of government, Congress, Senate, and state assembly, and 2 sets of maps. So when we're looking at all these together, it's just so complicated. Also, the maps they put out originally were completely unusable to the public. They were these huge zip files that kept crashing people's computers. They had PDF images within the zip files, but the PDFs looked like this. I can see nothing on this map. I have no idea what is underneath these new lines. I don't know the streams. I don't know where anything is. They were basically unusable. We created a Google map of all of the draft maps along with the current maps that can be basically overlaid on top of each other so that people in New York State can see each version of the drafts and can also see the current lines as well. I just was on Twitter before we started this meeting and I saw that the commission has also done this. Finally, literally a week later, finally has done this. It took them a full week to do this. It took us a day to do this. It's crazy. But anyway, I'm done ranting. The commission also has a map like this now too on their website. So you can use their map, you can use our map. I've seen some community people do something similar. This is so much easier. These Google Maps in the search bar, you can search your address, you can search your church, you can search basically anything in this map and be able to zoom in and kind of really see where your community is within these lines. I also have here on the slide that the 2 sets of maps are called the letter maps and the name maps, and the letter maps were drafted by Democrats and the name maps were drafted by Republicans, the nominated commissioners of those parties.
Jennifer, Barb Thomas has her hand raised.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to mention that the map that you're showing are congressional maps. You want to just show do you have the ability to show the Senate and the Assembly too? Because I know none of the maps address the things that we spoke about or that the other people from Saratoga County spoke about when we testified.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. I have to take off the PowerPoint though, because this is just a screenshot, but I can. Do you want to do that now or you want to do that at the end?
At the end, it'd be fine.
Okay, and then when we do that, I can put the link in the chat too, so people can play with it themselves. But yes, that's a very good point, Barb. Thank you. And that actually is a great segue because the next thing I was going to talk about is what we've been up to in relation to redistricting, besides complaining to the commission that they're not doing a good job. In that letter we sent in August, in addition to saying, please put this stuff online so people can see, we also said, please publicize your negotiations. We want to see how you're making these decisions about mapping. It's very common for commission-led redistricting processes to actually publicize their negotiations, to have public meetings and talk out their differences. And thus far, the commission has not given any indication that they will be doing that. So we sent a follow-up letter actually today, which is kind of funny that they put out their version of this today. And we just sent the letter at like 3 o'clock today, basically saying like, you're not being transparent, therefore you will not be accountable. You need to have public meetings and you need to make these maps in an easier to read and look at format. And I guess they've done that part, but it remains to be seen if they will have more public meetings. From our point here as the league, we're going to continue to educate people on this process and we're going to continue to encourage them to engage, even though it's feeling like that might not be a fruitful endeavor to engage. Like, we don't know if they're going to listen to us in this process, but the good news is that if people do engage, if there is sort of quote unquote evidence out there of what people are asking for, when groups go to sue, if the maps are really partisan, there'll be much more information included in those lawsuits. There'll be a lot more evidence in the lawsuit if people are out there staying engaged, staying involved, demanding their maps be drawn fairly. So we are going to continue to encourage people to participate in this process. And on the next slide, I have all of the dates of the upcoming hearings. They are doing these in person. thus far, right now, they're still scheduled to be in person. As you can see, the first one is at the end of October, October 20th. I don't know if things will change before then. I don't know if they'll offer a hybrid option or what, but these are the current dates. And all of this information, including the map and everything, is on the league's website, nyredistricting.org. So all of this is on there, the hearing dates, the map that we created, as well as all of our old materials where we did training on how to write testimony, how to present testimony, how to identify your community of interest. All of that's on our website. So we're going to continue to be working on that, which is very good. So then the last thing, and then we can kind of play around with the map, is other issues. And as I mentioned at the top of the program, the legislature has been kind of busy. They've been kind of keeping themselves busy this summer. They don't always do that, but I think they just, being a non-election year, they're not having to petition. They're going to do some other things. And I also think that the former governor's terrible, disgusting behaviors has sort of led them to be like, okay, we can't just sit by the entire summer and not do anything when all of these horrible things are going on. So here are some of the things we've sort of been working on and related to legislative issues. And I apologize, this slide is just so darn boring, but this is these are the things I haven't been doing presentations on. I've been writing testimonies on, and testimonies are just not that interesting to look at unless you're going to deeply read them. So starting off, we have been working with the Senate Committee on Government Ethics and Operations, I think is the title. It has a long title, on reforming the Joint Commission on Public Ethics. This is basically the commission that's supposed to be in charge of looking over the legislature and the executive and lobbyists as well, and making sure that there's no bad behavior going on. You may have seen some news about the governor's book deal, the former governor's book deal that was approved through JCOB, and there was a secret vote, and it's a horrible, horrible commission. It's extremely dysfunctional. All of the people on the commission are appointees that are all basically very involved with the seated legislature and executive, and how can they police the people who are like basically their best friends? Like, that's just not going to happen. So we have been working to reform this commission and to actually consolidate it with the Legislative Ethics Commission, which is another commission that's also supposed to police the legislature and does not do a good job. So there was a hearing back in August to sort of receive recommendations on how exactly to do this, and we testified at that hearing. The one sort of sticking point for reforming this particular agency is the appointment process of the commissioners and making sure that it is truly independent. And that always seems to be a problem with commissions, is like, well, who's going to appoint the commissioners? Like, how are we going to get them? So basically what we've been saying is that we would love to see a truly independent sort of citizen-led commission, but that's extremely difficult to achieve. So we're trying to work with some of our partners to find like a balance there. And then the next thing we've been working on is Board of Elections reform. And the Senate Elections Committee actually had a sort of roadshow hearing show throughout the state this summer, where they went to New York City, they went to Syracuse, I think, Rochester, Westchester. Interestingly, did not go to the Capital Region. And I think that was it. I think that was all the places they went, and basically invited people, voters, just regular people or people who have been poll workers, to come and testify about their experiences, either working as a poll worker or being a voter voting in that area. And they had pretty good turnout, and they ended this roadshow in Albany yesterday, actually, to invite the good government groups, voting rights advocates, and Board of Elections commissioners to come and testify and talk about sort of their take on all of this. So we went, we testified, we asked for our usual sort of transparency, accountability. We're also now asking for greater standardization in staffing for boards of election. The one thing we didn't talk about this time, which we almost always talk about, is funding for boards of elections. But this time we really focused in on problems we have identified with boards of elections because there is not consistency around the state in how things are done. So that was yesterday. And in addition to those things, we're also starting to plan our 2020 priorities and just thinking through what are some of the big issues we will be working on next year. Some of the things that I'm excited about are criminal justice reform. Right now, we're working on getting a committee together, a statewide committee to look at criminal justice reform issues that the league is going to advocate on next year. We're also starting to plan some of our environmental conservation priorities and some of the sort of like plastic-free initiatives and climate change initiatives we'll be working on next year. Those are sort of in the very early planning stages, but there's always a lot going on. Medical aid in dying is something Barb Thomas is our issue specialist for and always does an excellent job representing the league with. But I think I'm going to end it there, and I will take us over to the maps, and we can look at the maps. That's very fun and exciting. And just bear with me while I get there. Okay. All right. Oop, this is the wrong page. Try again. Okay, sorry guys. Here we go. Okay, so this is the map. And Barb, which ones did you want to see? You want to see all of them? Oh, you're muted, Barb.
Yeah, why don't you show, this is a congressional map, right?
This is, so on the left is all of, like, they call them the layers. So this is the current Senate district. Do you want to see, you want to do congressional first? See the current congressional?
That's not the current congressional, is it?
Yes.
All right, then show us the two proposed.
Okay, so here's the names congressional, and I'll take the overlay off so you can just see that one. And then here's the letters one. You want me to zoom in a little?
So I would just say, when I look at either of these, what we had testified for, and so had the Immigration Coalition, was that Saratoga County should be aligned with the Capital District, that we relate much more to the Capital District than to the North Country. However, this particular map splits Saratoga Springs. Actually, in this one, who is this one? Is this the Republican?
This is the Democrat one.
The Democratic one. Okay, so they put all of Saratoga Springs in the North Country. The Republican one drew the map so that, yeah. So that Saratoga Springs, this one, I thought that they had separated the school district of Saratoga Springs. So that's this, Saratoga Springs was in the southern and aligned with Albany, actually, in one of them.
Are you thinking of maybe the Senate one does that?
Maybe.
Okay, let's look at that one. Okay. Take them off and we'll do Senate names first. So this is the Republican one. I know it's hard to look at these.
Okay, so you can look at this and see that Saratoga Springs City is aligned with Amsterdam. Not so much with Albany. It doesn't seem. But the rest of the school district, Greenfield, Wilton, Gansford, are not included with that. So we think that that's bad in our county.
And here's the other one for reference for folks. So this is the Democrat one. They're all kind of a mess, to be honest with you.
Yeah, they are. I mean, this one, again, where Saratoga Springs and most of the school district, not all of it, are aligned with that whole rural part of Rensselaer and Columbia County, and maybe even part of Greene. I'm not sure how far down that goes, but not the capital district, really, not Troy, Albany, Schenectady.
Jennifer, did I understand you to say that there's no reasoning behind this? Like they're not explaining where the justification, it looks like a child took a pencil and scribbled all over the map.
Yeah, no, you're right, Linda. And it's kind of funny too, because both of these firms that drew these maps have never drawn maps for New York State. And in fact, as far as I know, from what I've heard from other experts who know more than me, they've never drawn state maps before either. So this is like, it's kind of amateur hour a little bit, which is why we're so ticked off that there was no public RFP process. Like, why were these firms even hired when they turned this out?
I mean, not knowing anything about the situation, I would assume that things are partitioned off based on the best representation. So the North Country might be a big area because there's not a lot of people there. You know, like, so they try to concentrate and give fair representation across the state for everybody in the state. I don't know how that would happen here.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna share the link with everybody in the chat. So if anyone wants to like look at these themselves, then they can do that. And then, like I said, I think the commission just did their own version today too. And I'm hoping also broke the PDFs out of the zip files as well, so those can be easier access, because sometimes it's helpful to look at the PDF and look at these, because the way Google sort of imports these, you can kind of almost see, if you look really close, that there's like a little tiny baby gap in between the lines that can make it feel like even more weird, but it's just the way Google does it. So, but I'm going to take this off because I feel like I'm going to make people dizzy if I leave it up. But great, that's all for me. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer questions.
And I do think with so few people, we can just physically raise our hands if people want to. Anne Marie.
I don't have a question, but I did want to point out that and tell Jennifer, our meetup next month is focused on redistricting. And I know we'll be talking about Proposition 1 as well in that whole thing. So we'll get really into the weeds with redistricting for Saratoga County, October 20th.
Yeah, Darnell.
Okay, it looks to me like in one of those maps, they would have Tonko and Elise Stefanik going head to head. And in another one of those maps, they have done that thing where they've drawn completely around the city of Syracuse, putting Syracuse in one and going all the way around the outside in another district. And it, you know, I'm just looking at who now represents us and where those lines are and who they would be then pitting against each other.
Oh yeah, the Syracuse one in particular, and it's so funny because that's the Democrat one. There's 3 seats there in Syracuse currently that are all held by Democrats, and now all 3 of those senators, if this map is the one that moves forward, are going to be competing against each other. Like, it's crazy to me. You would think that wouldn't be in their best interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, Anne.
You're muted.
Okay, Jennifer, a question. What do you think the chances are that they're going to listen to your current requests that you said in before and again today, that there be more transparency and that we hear more what's going on?
I don't know that they're going to. And it's funny because I had a conversation with one of the reporters to kind of like gauge the thought on, is this violating open meetings law if they're not having public meetings? But I guess a quorum to constitute a public meeting is 8 commissioners. And if they're both meeting independently, the 5 who are Republican, we're really 4 Republican plus 1 unaffiliated who's a conservative, and the 5 Democrat, which one is a Working Families Party, but really a Democrat. If they're both meeting independently, that's only 5 and 5. That doesn't constitute a quorum and therefore does not require an open public meeting. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to think that they're not going to listen and they're not going to have any public meetings, which is terrible. It's despicable, really. This is like a public voted on commission, but there isn't too much we can do about that, unfortunately.
So after all of these laws that we got passed and we thought it was so terrific, what?
Yeah, no, I know. It's not ideal. And especially now with this amendment on the ballot for November, that's going to make it even worse and even more sort of in the hands of the legislature and the majority party. But just got to keep a positive attitude, I guess.
I know you went through this yesterday, but can you highlight some of those ballot things that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, sure. So the first one, the redistricting one, is extremely complicated, and it's just it has like 1,000 parts within it. And when we originally did our educational forum on this, I presented it as like, here's the uncontroversial stuff and here's the controversial stuff. So the uncontroversial is constitutionalizing things that are already in statute or are already required by the US Constitution. So things that are in statute are setting the number of state senators at 63, reapportioning people who are incarcerated back to their last residence. Things that are required by the US Constitution are removing any language referring to aliens in the state constitution because it violates the Equal Protection Clause, and also making sure that we're counting non-citizens in our total population count. And something that is uncontroversial and kind of needs to happen is changing the timeline to submit maps, which Sally tried to talk about last night, but I don't think did an excellent job. No offense to Sally. I know you all know the petitioning process now for these lines happens in March because we moved our primary and all of that. When we did this amendment, it didn't happen in March, it happened later. Now it happens in March. If the commission fails to deliver a map that's approved by the legislature on January 1st, then there's a potential that the legislature can basically take this process over. But if they do have their map on January 1st, rather, the legislature can reject those maps and say, do it again, try again. And in that case, the commission has to be notified by the end of February that they need to do it again. There is no deadline as to when the legislature needs to vote to approve those maps. There's a potential that this process could go on for a full year next year under our current amendment, which wouldn't have been a problem before, but might be a problem now. This proposal would change the timeline So not for this one, because it'll be too late for this one, but for future redistricting processes, the commission will have to deliver their draft maps to the legislature by November of the year ending in 1. So it'll just change the process going forward and make sure that we don't run into the problem of people petitioning for seats that don't exist. Now, the controversial changes to the amendment are all related to the voting structure of both the commission voting on the lines to go to the legislature, and then the legislature voting on the lines to approve them. So the current amendment includes a fail-safe that guarantees if one party is in control of both houses, and I'm going to use the real example of the current situation, which is the Democrats control both the Senate and the Assembly, there's a fail-safe that requires a minimum vote of minority appointed commissioners from the redistricting commission. So a minimum number of minority appointed redistricting commissioners have to vote in favor of the final maps. And then once those maps go to the legislature, there needs to be a 3/5 vote of both the Senate and Assembly to approve the maps if both houses are controlled by a single party, essentially a supermajority. This proposal would say no special rules. It doesn't matter who's in charge. It doesn't matter who's in control. Simple majority vote is all that is required for the commission to approve the maps and all that is required for the legislature to approve the maps. Now, truthfully, being honest with you, the Democrats have a supermajority in both houses currently. So even if this amendment doesn't pass, they can still override the minority party if they want to, which they probably want to. So in a way, for this cycle, it's not going to really matter, but in future cycles, there could be situations where they don't have a supermajority and would be able to make sure that they can vote on these proposals, both in the commission sense of the commission having minority commissioners voting for these, and then the legislature having minority party legislators voting for these. That is sort of the big elephant in the room. And part of why we're opposing it too, not just that, is that there's like no reason to do this right now. Like the commission has never even had a chance to function, and now they're trying to change the rules as they're going through the process. We don't even know if this voting process is going to be a problem. Like we don't know, we've never done it before. And we're right in the middle of it. And it's very complicated for voters. It's very complicated for the commission. And it's just sort of further, I feel like, disincentivizing the commission from working together, because they know if this amendment passes, it doesn't matter at the end of the day, the minority commissioners, the majority commissioners, the majority party can just do whatever they want. Why am I even going to try and work with these other people if I know that my say is not going to matter? So that is sort of the big things. I guess the last big thing with it is that it includes a provision that says if the commission fails, the legislature gets to basically draw the lines, where the current amendment says if the commission fails, the legislature takes the maps with the highest number of votes and then can make amendments to those, but has to obey the constitutional mandates. Or if the commission deadlocks, then the court gets to draw the maps. So there's like all this like other nuance within this too. Like I said, it's a very complicated amendment, but the basic argument is it would increase partisanship in this process. So. Oh, and now, do you guys want to hear about the other ones? I'm done hearing from me. Okay, so proposal 2 is just adding, literally adding the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment to Article 1 of the Constitution. That's basically the sentence exactly, which is so funny. So that one we're supporting as well. There's definitely some pro and cons on this one. Like it can be a little hard to interpret something so general. There's nowhere defined what healthful means. It's just healthful environment. But there are a number of other states who have something similar in their constitution. I think it's 43, and also 2 states who have it outright in their constitution. I think one is Montana. I always get the first one wrong, but I know for sure the second one is Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania has actually used this constitutional amendment to ban plastic bags. So they've used it for that, but before that hadn't really used it and had it a really long time. Second one is about removing the 10-day registration deadline from the Constitution. That one we've worked on a long time. This would allow for same-day registration, but would not guarantee it. All this does is remove that deadline from the Constitution. We will still have, even if this passes in January, we will still have a 25-day deadline because that is in state statute. So even if this passes, nothing changes until the legislature decides to move that deadline. Then the next one is no excuse absentee voting, allowing for that. And that basically will just remove the causes from the absentee request form saying you need to say you're going to be absent from the county or sick or ill or taking care of somebody who's sick or ill. It'll just take all those excuses away. And then the fifth one is the New York City Civil Court one, which is so funny because it only applies to New York City, but it's in the state constitution. There's so much city stuff in the state constitution. It's very annoying. But this one just raises the amount of money for claims that can be heard before the civil court from $25,000 to $50,000. They said that this is an inflation adjustment. When we had our webinar on this, we had a retired city civil court judge come and talk about it. And I thought the way he explained it was really funny, where he basically said, it's like your mom giving you like chicken soup or Vicks Vapor Rub when you're sick. It's not going to like hurt, but it's not necessarily going to do anything great and powerful. It's an inflation adjustment. It could increase the number of cases the city civil court were here. It also could would maybe reduce the backlog of the Supreme Court, because I guess that's where the cases get kicked up to now, and it's a little harder to navigate the Supreme Court. So that's the last one, and that is all the ballot props.
Anybody else have questions or comments? I don't think so. Thank you, Jennifer.